It's almost like Ubisoft wants people to be angry over Assassin's Creed Shadows because instead of trying to explain the decisions that they've made in a very respectful way, they have ran to the mainstream media to defend them, and now the New York Times is attacking players in defense of this game. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, there is nothing that they could do at this point that would completely change the perception of Assassin's Creed Shadows, that would fix all of the major mistakes they've made so far, and there are inevitably going to be people that boycott this title and that decide to not monetarily support it, and now the French video game developer Ubisoft has ran to the New York Times in order to attack its own players in an attempt to salvage its upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows game. We see this happen all the time, where the Kathleen Kennedys of the world run to the mainstream media, or the actors behind projects like Amandla, they go to the mainstream media, and then instead of just admitting, hey, there are going to be people who think that this project is controversial and don't like it, they just call us racists, sexists, bigots for criticizing a product. And of course, it's no shocker to see that's exactly what's happening with Shadows. In a place straight out of Prime Video's playbook for Lord of the Rings: The Rings of Power, this is also true, they've leveraged Zachary Small in the New York Times as well as a so-called expert to attack players ahead of the release of Shadows. If you recall, back in February 2022, Rings of Power execs worked with Vanity Fair's writers Anthony Bresnick and Joanna Robinson to attack fans of Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, knowing that what they had created was an abomination. Yeah, I mean, we've seen this happen so many times over the years, and it doesn't get any less surprising. Like, it's shocking that you had an amazing franchise like The Lord of the Rings to work with, and you picked the worst people possible to work on it, to create something like The Rings of Power, something that cost them over $1 billion between the rights, the first season, and some of the second season. You'd think that they would want to do the best job possible, but that's not the case. And then when we call them out on doing the worst job possible, they go, nope, you guys are ists and phobes, which is absurd. And that's what has been happening in Hollywood, unfortunately, for years at this point, and has been happening very frequently in the gaming industry. It's as first the duo wrote when Amazon released photos of its multicultural cast, even without character names or plot details. The studio endured a reflexive attack from trolls, the anonymous online kind, and that's what they're saying is happening with Ubisoft. Ubisoft has done something similar with the New York Times and Small. Like them, Small wrote, some gamers erupted over his, aka Yasuke's, appearance, convinced that the franchise, known for its immersive recreations of the past, had, quote, gone woke by including a black character in its depiction of 16th century Japan. He then claims that developers received personal attacks and even death threats during an online harassment campaign. First of all, we hear this time and time again that there are online harassment campaigns and developers or writers or actors receive harassment and death threats, yet they never show any screenshots. And I'm not sitting here saying, oh, you need to have 500 logged examples to prove this, but you could at least show off a handful. If you are writing an article that potentially hundreds of thousands to millions of people could see, you probably should have some kind of evidence released that backs up these claims. But they never do that. They just say, oh, we've received all of this hatred, but we never see it. All we see, if we go to social media and we start digging, is criticisms, and criticisms and harassment are not the same things. These people will try to convince you that they are, but they are not. Though they say some gamers erupted over Yasuke's appearance. No, we were not erupting over Yasuke's appearance. We were erupting over the fact that, yes, it was a controversial decision to put Yasuke into this game, but because he wasn't historically accurate to the real human being that lived. from what we understand about Yasuke, he was more of a retainer than a full blown samurai. So, should he be a full blown samurai in this game? Well, one would deduce not. But that's not what happened here. That's what they decided to do because, of course, they knew that they had to have him be as strong and powerful as possible in this game in order to be able to sell him as a protagonist. And him being a protagonist is also a major issue because Assassin's Creed has had historical figures in it in the past. George Washington, Leonardo da Vinci, Cleopatra, there's a lot of them. These are just the three that I instantly think of. And while, of course, some of the characters that they put into these games that were historical figures, we don't know every single thing about them. We don't know every detail about their lives, but they tried to do the best job that they could. But it didn't even matter that much to a lot of people if they had even done only 50% of the work, because at the end of the day, they were passing characters. They were not large parts of the narrative. They were not protagonists. This is the first time you have had a playable historical figure in an Assassin's Creed game, which is why it's so important that you get it right, that you try to do your best. But instead of actually looking at the historical evidence that we do have, they went to fanfiction writers like Thomas Lockley, who say, oh yeah, Yasuke was a full-blown samurai. And he's honestly come up with some wild stories about Yasuke, and he even admitted only a couple of months ago that he did because he wanted money. He was boasting about how, yeah, well, Shadows is receiving backlash, but at least copies of my books are selling. Like, that is such an awful mindset, and it just proves that Ubisoft is not doing the best job possible. And instead of simply taking our criticisms and trying to listen to them, they're running to outlets like the New York Times to call us racists and sexists and just bigots in totality. And of course, after attacking gamers, he then weaves a false narrative that has already been refuted for months by citing a historian who is an admitted communist, and then small cites their claims that this is without question that Yasuke was a samurai. There was very few historical documents about him, but there's no doubt he was a samurai who served Nobunaga. But, however, it is highly disputed that he was a samurai, as a different historian, Goza, who is a faculty member at the International Research Center for Japanese Studios focusing on Japanese medieval history, and the author of What is a Samurai, speculated that Yasuke was simply his bodyguard, an entertainer, rather than a samurai. But if you simply put Yasuke in this game and you made him a protagonist and he was simply Nobunaga's, bodyguard and an entertainer rather than a samurai, it wouldn't look that good in promotional material. It wouldn't be as epic and as cool. So instead of picking one of the millions of samurai in Japan's history that would have perfectly fit into a story like this, no. They just had to go for the one single individual that would also push the EI instead of trying to accurately represent what Japan looked like at the time and the historical figures of the time. They decided, we're going to take the one black individual who has been talked about a lot over the past couple of years that we know was in Japan at the time, and we're going to find the work of someone like Thomas Lockley who is pushing a narrative similar to ours, and we are going to make him the lead character of the game. That just hasn't sat well with a lot of people, and it's kind of a no-brainer as to why. If he was just a side character in this game and they had made him a samurai, well, I don't think many people would be so upset. I do think that 50% of the controversy would not exist because he's just a passing character, he's a side character. But when you have systems in this game, like it is confirmed there's going to be LGBT romances, and those romances are pertaining to the character you're playing as, and you're playing as a historical figure, It just doesn't look that good for Ubisoft and the team behind this game. So, at the end of the day, is it very shocking to see a company like Ubisoft running to the legacy media? No. It doesn't look good for them, but it's not shocking. And I'm sure that over the next few months leading up to release, we're going to see this happen a hell of a lot more. So I will be keeping my eye on Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed Shadows, but they've ran to the New York Times to attack players in defense of this title. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.